Good morning, my fellow deplorables. I apologize, it has been a while since I've finally decided to do a video. I thought now that I am going to be doing videos more often, as there seems to be more stuff to piss me off, for me to feel the need, the compulsion to voice my opinion on, that'd be a good idea to take a political test to see exactly where I am. So if you're watching my channel, you can get a good idea of where I'm at. Now, I've heard a couple people and seen some YouTubers suggest the 8 values. That's 8values.github.io. So as a reasonable test that seems to be a good job of telling one where their political opinions are at. So I will be taking this test as well. A slight note before I start the video, however, I am a little sick right now. So if you hear a segment that it sounds like I'm in the middle of a sentence and then audio disappears for a second and then it comes back, maybe not necessarily finishing the sentence, it's because I am editing out in post all the sections that I devolve into a coughing fit. Because I, A, am polite, and B, that if I were to leave this coughing fit in here, it would probably blow your eardrums out. So let's start with the 8 values test. Oppression by corporations is more of a concern than oppression by governments. I mean, oppression by either one is a disastrous state. As one who likes reading a lot of cyberpunk fiction, I believe that oppression by a corporation is also a very shitty experience, but a government is supposed to be able to keep the corporations in check. And generally, even if a corporation is oppressing people, it is usually because they have the backing of the government behind them, who is able to enforce or let the corporation get away with or let slide with all the crappy things that's doing to a populace. Like in the case of Monsanto, pushing a lot of its GMO products or the glyphosates in Roundup. It's getting away with it because it has a stranglehold on the government. So in this case, I would say I strongly disagree, because oppression by a corporation still requires the use of or oppression of the government or lack of the government to step in. So I would say that in the end it still comes down to the government is involved more so than the corporation, because in the case of a government that's actually enforcing the laws that corporations are supposed to adhere to, that would prevent the oppression by corporations. So I'm going to strongly disagree on this one. It is necessary for the government to intervene in the economy to protect consumers. It depends upon how it's intervening to protect consumers. Now, if you're talking about, like in the case of the Samsung Galaxy Note 7, that the government should step in to prevent the corporation from selling a product that's blowing up in people's pockets, the government is stepping in to prevent people from taking said product onto an airplane that is known to blow up and could therefore endanger the lives of people. Yes, a government does have a very strong responsibility to intervene to protect its consumers. However, if you're talking about using the previous example of Monsanto again, the government intervening to protect consumers, it's not doing its job. And in some cases, it's letting Monsanto slide and get away with forcing poisonous products on us. So it would be nice if the government would intervene in that case. What concerns me, however, is I don't like government interventionism in general, because if the government protects us from the phones that are blowing up everywhere, which it should, where's the line for then the government jumping in and bailing out the Wall Street banks at the expense of the U.S. citizen, at the expense of our economy in general? I guess I will put agree, because there are valid instances where this should occur. The freer the market, the freer the people. As long as the government is only stepping in to, again, prevent Monsanto from putting glyphosates in Roundup. If the government is around to stop the sale of iPhone 7s so that it doesn't kill anybody, if the government's only stopping people from bringing said iPhone 7s on aircraft, where if one were to catch fire could kill everybody on board, if the government just stuck to that, we would be golden. The problem is the government occasionally gets involved into stuff where it says what should be the exact size of an item sold. You get the EPA jumping in that's saying certain things are hazardous to the health of some God knows organism that no one's ever heard of before, but they'll use it as an example to shut down $1 billion industry, putting people out of work, causing jobs, and then we switch the manufacturing of the U.S. over to China, where they will just poison and loot and destroy their entire country, their entire populace, as far as they can. I guess you could say agree on this, because I think this is coming from a more leftist perspective, that the government should stay out of it, the markets for the most part, except for direct threats to life or limb. That if they would stop regulating, like you have to put on, like the government regulating what has to be on a food label. There are times when that's a benefit that I wish that there was more open disclosure, but then you've got these market initiatives where other organizations are guaranteeing, such as GMO free, such as all natural organic, where the government won't take the time to regulate that. So I guess I'm going to say that in general, the freer the markets, the freer the people. It is better to maintain a balanced budget than to ensure welfare for all citizens. I strongly agree. The reason being, if you can't maintain a balanced budget, eventually you're going to run out of money that you can beg, borrow, or steal to provide welfare for all of your citizens. So in the end, you keep a balanced budget or you end up screwed. So I'll strongly agree. Publicly funded research is more beneficial to the people than leaving it to the market. I think I'm going to lean towards neutral unsure for this one. The reason being is market-based research is always going to put money into the products that the market, or such as the people, find the most financially beneficial. Market research or market-based funded research will put money into immediate concerns, such as with the concerns over higher gas prices. What did we get? The hybrid cars, with another example, and probably a better example that's actually financially accessible to most of market-based research. Or in the case of natural gas, though this is a touchy subject that I don't necessarily agree with, in the case of higher gas costs, what did they do? They invested money into fracking. Now, fracking is not something I particularly agree with, but it did serve a need because of the high gas prices to help try to lower the immediate cost of gas. Publicly funded research examples would probably be NASA, due to at the time there really was no market value in pursuing space research. However, public funded research also has the tendency to shift towards, I was reading some of the projects that are on the government budget plan, something about testing Swedish massages on rabbits. What value that could be for the lifespan of the rabbit. That I'm not up for. So it depends upon what it's doing, and as long as the publicly funded research can be voted on by the people, more so, and has to prove that it is of a long-term benefit to the population, I guess that maybe public funded research could have certain long-term benefits, but in the short term, it's better off leaving research to the marketplace. So in this case, I'll be neutral unsure. Now on to international trade is beneficial. Well, of course. And I believe I'm paraphrasing really badly George Washington, but I think he said roughly something along the lines of that, hey, if you're trading with each other, you're less likely to be shooting at each other. I mean, look at Germany, for Pete's sake. 2 world wars under their belts. They should have, in theory, pissed off every one of their neighbors. But yet now they get along, they trade with everybody in Europe. There's now no real big fear of Germany invading or going to war with anybody anymore, because they have a trade agreement going. Look at China, even how hellish whole commie they are. They're still not going to go to war with most of their neighbors because they need them for trade purposes. They need people to buy their cheap-ass crap. So when you have international trade, it is beneficial to all parties. So yes, I strongly agree. International trade is beneficial. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Ah, yes, we come out the Communist Manifesto from Karl Marx. And this video is already, into 15 minutes long, and it's on question 7, so I can't wait to see how long this goes. Well, when I can agree to, from each according to his ability, yes, you should be rewarded based upon your ability, what you contribute. Unfortunately, sometimes that also benefits those who are good at scamming everybody else. So sometimes you do get some bad apples through the cracks, but you have to reward everybody to their ability to produce. And we do that with what's called giving them our money when we purchase their product. To each according to their needs, however, how do we determine whose need is more than another's? There's too much leeway, so from this I strongly disagree. Or, no, let me do disagree just because you should be rewarded to your ability, but I don't agree with to your need, because who determines what your need is? Sometimes what you think is your need is not your need. Other times what other people think your need is not what your need is. So there's too much wiggle room. It would be best if social programs were abolished in favor of private charity. I'll do with agree on this. And here's why. I would like to see an alteration in our tax system that instead of allowing rich folk to be able to take charitable contributions for donating to arts and like NPR, WXXI. They're nice extras, but what do they do for anybody really? Now, I don't mind them donating to like cancer foundations, but how about instead of donating to XXI, NPR, that also receive tons of government money, how about instead those contributions go to instead funding like low-income housing, maybe help defer someone's medical bills through charity, sort of like a GoFundMe, but for rich people to help pay the Joe Schmoes on the street, us poor schmucks who are left carrying the bill. So I would say, yes, it would be better if they were abolished in favor of private charity, because then private charity can also determine better what money needs to go to something. Like the government, I believe, is one of the research projects that are on right now is Swedish massages on bunnies that I've heard. I don't want the government putting money into that social program. I'd rather have it go to a guy just never done anything wrong in his life, tried to be as healthy as possible, would be NFL quarterback if he could, but comes up with cancer. I'd like to see him get some money reimbursement instead of the damn bunny get a massage. So I would guess agree on this one. Taxes should be increased on the rich to provide for the poor. I'll put disagree on this one, just because that you tax somebody too much, they're going to look for other ways to get out of the country. Like, if we put these, like, what did Bernie Sanders support, a 90% income tax on the rich? Guess what? They're just going to take their money, go someplace else, and be outside the reach of Uncle Sam. They'll find a way to do it one or the other. So now we've got all of us poor schmucks who can barely feed and take care of ourselves, and all the rich folk have headed off to greener pastures and left us behind. So congratulations, you tax the rich, now there are no rich left to tax. It doesn't help us poor guys on the street. It would be better. I would like to see an alteration to our tax system, like 4 tax brackets. If you make, these are rough numbers, I've had it more fleshed out in the past, but like under $35,000 a year, 0% income tax rate. 35 to about 100, a 5% tax rate. 100 to a quarter mil, 10% tax rate, from about a quarter to a mil, 15 to 20% tax rate, and then a mil over a 25% tax rate. I would think that is reasonable tax rate system, much better than what we've got right now in the U.S. It wouldn't encourage them to just flee to other countries and then stop with these ridiculous tax deductions that I forgot who made the quote that he shouldn't be paying less than his secretary, and he was like a billionaire. So I don't agree with this in general. Inheritance is a legitimate form of wealth. Well, somebody paid taxes on that money, so taxes already been paid on it, so somebody should be able to take it. I mean, leftists like to think, oh, the billionaire giving his son $1 billion when he dies, even though the son's done nothing to help society. You know, we could have that. It's still his money. It is legitimately the father's money. He can determine what he wants to do, give it to his son or not. That's his decision. Just like if we go down to us poor Joe Schmo, my family, they're still working stiffs. They're in their 60s. They're still going to work, working for the man, because they got to take care of themselves, because they don't have much. They've got a little bit stored up that maybe if they were really frugal could take care of themselves from now until maybe about 80, but there's all types of things that can happen. Medical, they can't take that chance, so they got to keep working. Now, let's say, and I honest to God hope that nothing happens to my folks. I love them, and if I could, I would never want them to leave ever. But if they were to pass away, what money they have stored up? Well, first off, part of that inheritance is going to go to funeral expenses, because death taxes in this country are a nightmare. When you look at burial, when you look at the cost of taking care of them, their outstanding liabilities that still have to be reimbursed, most of that money is going to go for us Joe Schmo to covering our parents' funerals. So yes, we should be allowed to inherit money. And then plus, our parents sacrificed, went through hell to try to provide for their kids growing up. Shouldn't they, as like one last helping hand to their kids, be allowed for the money that they've already earned and paid taxes on, be allowed to give it to their kids as a chance to maybe allow them a better spot in life, to allow them to get ahead in life once? I mean, we like to think about the rich and their forms of inheritance. What about us Joe Schmo? And to any of you leftards that are out there listening to this who think that, my parents aren't going to be able to give me anything because they're broke, guess what? There's probably going to be at least a smidgen of money left over. Even a couple bucks, that's still a couple bucks you didn't have and could be used to, for Pete's sake, give you a nice meal at Applebee's one weekend, for Pete's sake, so you can think of them and how they helped you out. So inheritance is a legitimate form of wealth. I strongly agree. Public utilities like roads and electricity should be publicly owned. Now, I understand that there's issues with local monopolies such as gas and electric. It's very difficult right now with our current technology to set up proper competition. And I mean where you could have multiple gas and electric companies in the same area. Yes, you can do alternatives to the local utilities, but they're not really true alternatives, and they come with all their own problems, and in some ways that they are less practical than being hooked up to the main utilities. So, and I understand the problem, why you have to have a certain level of municipality monopoly with them, because it would be very difficult for a competitive company to justify laying in their own separate gas pipe to have a true competition, or their own separate electrical lines to have true competition. It's so impractical. There's a reason why the government kind of semi-sanctions local monopolies in this case, because there is no real true free market alternative right now that we can set up. So I will agree that well, I don't want to agree in that case, actually. I understand the necessary evil. I would prefer truer competition, and at the very least, I would like the gas and electric company to be locally owned, as in owned by the municipality, not owned by a foreign corporation from Spain that supplies gas to our local area. In the case of public roads, that one, you really have to give it to the government, even though they do a horrible job at it. How are you going to have people build multiple roads? Like in the downtown area, you're going to have to charge people per usage of that roads for private corporations to justify building them. And how are you going to do that? Set up a toll every street corner when their section of road ends? So you pay a toll going from section of road to section of road. That's insane. Or even worse, more traffic cameras set up in the area. So now you have Big Brother watching you, and then they're now watching all the cars to see what roads you're driving on, so they know how to tax you to give the money straight to the corporation. So in these cases, I will agree that utilities... the utilities I would prefer not, but at the very least have locally owned by the municipality and have their board of directors voted on, not just appointed, so that if they do something outrageous, you can vote the bums out and replace them. And the reason why I'll switch to agree is because in the case of roads, I don't see any alternative, so I guess you're kind of stuck with it, and I don't particularly like the alternatives that I can come up with. Excessive government intervention is a threat to the economy. Yes, look at the United States Federal Reserve. How you and I don't even own our own currency. And their interest rates, semi-government sanctioned interest rates manipulation, how that's destroyed our economy, how government intervention has determined what we can and cannot build in this country, often to the point that we're better off just having the Chinese do things in a less safe manner than we can do over here, and even more pollutant manner than we can do over here, such as coal. We do have, relatively speaking, clean coal power. That it would be nice if we could do it here, where we wouldn't pollute the planet as badly as the Chinese. So that's a really why I'll have to strongly agree that government intervention, excessive amounts especially, is really bad for the economy. Those with a greater ability to pay should receive a better health care. Ultimately, somebody's got to pay for it in the end. I would like more experimental treatments to be opened up so that they can say, hey, instead of the I forgot who, FDA determining what medical procedures can be done, perhaps increase the pot by having people willingly sign, hey, I know this is experimental, that it has a 0.0% chance of curing me, and it will probably kill me instead, but you know what, I'm willing to take the chance if I can get it for a reduced rate. I think they should do that. If the alternative for having everybody get stuck with the same health care, whether or not you want to are able to pay for it. You get the Charlie Grand situation where he's on the British NHS and they don't want to spend money to send him over here to the U.S. because, for God help them if the U.S. medical system cures the poor kid, because then everybody will want to come over here and they can't afford that. So I agree that, or I'll be neutral, I would prefer this not be so loaded, but I believe that if you can pay for better health care, you are entitled to better health care for what you can pay. But I'll hit neutral, unsure on this one. Quality education is a right of all people. Well, who defines what quality is? If you look at education here in the United States, it's not about teaching the kids. All these tests that are done of, look at our kids, they scored such averages on the SAT. Well, that's not to help the kids. All that is a report card for, was the teacher able to torture their kids enough that they retained enough information to regurgitate it for the standardized testing? And was the answer yes? Then the teacher gets a raise. Who cares that the kid doesn't have any quality information that'll actually help him in life? But yeah, he passed the test, so the standard is the teacher gets a pay raise if X number pass it. So who determines what quality education is? Plus, why should it be a right? I mean, you should have the right, if you want to seek education, to be able to pursue it on your own as far as you can. But you should not have it given to you just because you say it's given to you, because then of what use or worth is of the education then? So I disagree with this one. The means of production should belong to the workers who use them. No. And as a very poor blue-collar worker, this is my viewpoint on the situation. I know the communists will like to say that, but the worker is the one that put his blood, sweat, and tears into the product. Therefore, he should have a stake in ownership of the production means used to make it, since he spent his time. And I say to that, no. The worker was reimbursed for his time with a paycheck. Now, it's important to note that as an employer, you should be a moral employer. You should treat your employees fairly, give them access to legitimate, reasonable wages for the work that they're performing. But the reason why workers should not own the means of production that they're using is who put in all of the risk. Let's give an example of a bakery. Guy's a baker. He wants to open up a new bakery shop. So what does he have to do? He has to go to the bank, get a loan. He has to put his name on the loan. If he defaults on that loan in any way, shape, or form, the bank will probably seize his house, his car, any reasonable property he put up as collateral. Now, with that loan, he's then got to buy the equipment used to make the bread in his bakery. Now, he then has to hire workers to then use that equipment. And he's got to pay those workers whether or not he actually makes a profit or not. He has all the risk. And what is it? 80% of all new businesses fail. And you have to work the first 5 years as a store owner before you pay off enough of the loan to actually be truly making a profit in the business. I mean, that's a huge amount of liability on his head. Plus, if something goes wrong, like somebody gets food poisoning from one of the guy's loaves of bread, for the most part, the employees, as long as they didn't do anything wrong, are shielded. But the employer is the one that could lose his job, lose his business, and goes out on the street with nothing to show for it, while the workers reasonably have a chance to find another job someplace else. Maybe they might not want to put that they worked at bakery who gave food poisoning to people on their resume, but they can reasonably find a job somewhere else. The baker, who spent his time, his energy, and risked it all for a business, is the one who takes it in the end. So since he put all the risk in, he should own the means of production, because if anything goes wrong, it's his butt and everything goes with it. So really, how can you say that? And he's, at least if he's a fair, honest tradesman, should be reimbursing his employees fairly. So I disagree with this one. The United Nations should be abolished. Just look up United Nations war crimes. Oh boy, where to even begin? All the rapes that the UN soldiers have been accused of wherever they've been stationed, all of the human rights abusers on the Human Rights Council on the UN. They're just screwy Security Council system where any nation can veto any resolution put on the table just because they have the power to veto it. I mean, it's a horrid system. And if this is humanity, I don't want to live under that. Plus, then, just Google war crimes of the United Nations, plus the response to the latest Haitian disaster. Gonorrhea in the water. These people are incompetent and will kill more people than they help each year. So I strongly agree that they should be abolished. All right. Now to question 17. Military action by our nation is often necessary to protect it. I'll go neutral. Just because if we as a nation are attacked militarily, it is our right to defend ourselves via military means. Now, if we are not attacked militarily, no, we should not act militarily in response, such as the possible coming trade war with China. No, there should not be military action involved. It should be fights over trade embargoes. It should be fights over duties and taxes and fees and stuff like that. It should not get to the military point. But in the case of like 9/11, when we were attacked, we have the right then to respond and take out the bastards who attacked us. So I'll do neutral for this one. I support regional unions such as the European Union. No, the European Union is a disaster. I mean, look at them right now. They're splintering at the seams. They want in unrestricted refugee access to completely destroy the population balance that's right there. These economic migrants to come in to take the jobs from hardworking Europeans. They're not doing a good job. Plus, the larger a government is over the more diverse regions under its control, the less effective it works. The U.S. works for our land size because we evolved into it naturally. Our states came into the Union and helped evolve this country. It wasn't just a forced together schlock mess of a kickback to powerful government lobbyists that brought America together. Unlike the European Union. The European Union cannot work because there's too much diversity between the various nations under it that have different backgrounds, cultures, languages, desires, and wants. They cannot coherently come together to form the same type of union that the United States did because they evolved as separate entities and are now being forced to come together. So, no, I do not support the European Union. It is important to maintain our national sovereignty. Yes, I wish more people would do so. We as a country, if we do not maintain the core values that make us us, we no longer have a country. When we as America want to fix our borders, fix our internal industrial issues that we're facing right now, because we want to maintain our national sovereignty, it's because we want as a country to remain together. We want the various groups that form up the United States to be able to succeed. We can't succeed if we don't maintain our national sovereignty. I don't care what countries in overseas are doing, just like they don't care what we are doing. We should not be telling them what to do. They should not be telling us what to do. As I said with the European Union, the larger a government body you get over a much broader, diverse group of individuals, the less likely it works. Therefore, having a governmental party over the United States telling us what to do with our cultural backgrounds that dictate how we feel, how we respond to things, is not going to work. Therefore, we need to maintain our national sovereignty. So I will strongly agree with this one. A united world government would be beneficial to mankind. Just go back what I've been saying over these last couple questions. Government should be as localized as possible and should answer to the constituents that most directly represents. I'm not a fan of the federalization of our government. I believe that it should have been much weaker and should have political power lower down the totem pole, in the cities, in the counties type level, and to some extent the states. And because it's more accessible by the masses, the smaller the governmental body is, and the more local it is, and it's more readily able to address the issues the citizenry it's supposed to represent do. If you were to get a one world government, it wouldn't matter if it was the most wonderful government on planet Earth. There's no way it could take care of all the needs, wants, desires of the different factions that fall under it. Even if the one world government was led by the United States, which I will be egotistical and say is one of the best nations on planet Earth, there is no way that our culture, our needs, wants, desires, our way of thinking will be compatible with a lot of other nations or societies out there. Therefore, it would be extremely detrimental to mankind to have a one world government. We need government to be as local and as small as possible. It is more important to retain peaceful relations than to further our strength. These aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, it's important to retain peaceful relations, yes, but not at the expense of our strength. And I mean with that, when you negotiate, you need to do so from a position of either equality or superiority. Because unless you can negotiate from a position of superiority, and to do so in an honorable and open fashion, you cannot display moral fortitude. Such as like us with, let's just pick a random country. United States is negotiating with country B. Country B has no military whatsoever, has an economy the fifth the size of the United States. We say we want to enter in a peaceful trade negotiation, and you will abide by these terms. And that was a peaceful relationship, but at the expense of their strength. They got shafted. Just because you have a peaceful relation doesn't mean you have an equitable relationship between people. Unless we as the United States can come from a position of strength, how can we show moral fortitude by giving up? Unless we have power that we can give up periodically in the middle of trade, you know what? We want to come up with an equitable situation. We don't just want to throw our weight around for all parties involved. How can we display moral fortitude? So they should be sought together, not exclusively one over the other. So yeah, I'll say disagree, because they need to be done together, because unless they're done together, then everybody's just walking all over you then. Wars do not need to be justified to other countries. No. I mean, if you want them to join with you on your side of the war, yeah, you need to be able to justify it to someone else, but to declare war, all you have to do is to justify it to your citizenry. If your citizenry finds the war valid and true and just, they'll stand behind it. And that's all you need. You don't need to be going to the UN or to Europe to justify it unless you want them on our side. So I will strongly agree that they don't need to be justified to other countries unless you want them on your side. But that's not the requirement to go to war. That's just something if you want their help. Military spending is a waste of money. Strongly disagree. We need to have a strong military to protect ourselves. Now, when it comes to, from what I was reading, we spend more than the next 14 countries behind us combined, that is getting a little out there. I don't mind being the number one spender of military money for a strong and effective military, but 14 countries combined worth of military spending, I think we might be pushing that a little too far. That is starting to get into wasteful territory, or that's gone into wasteful territory. Plus, I don't really see it go to the poor coolie in the trenches as to a lot of military contractors who are building ridiculously expensive and wasteful projects that don't deliver, such as F-35 program. So I will disagree, but our spending needs to be cut back a bit and spent more wisely, not just lining the pockets of big defense contractors. International aid is a waste of money. Strongly disagree. I mean, we need to help our people here first. Us as Americans need to help Americans first. The example I like to give is your family, your kids are starving at the table. The family next to you, their kids are starving at the table. You need to feed your kids first. Then, after you fed your kids, then you can help out the kids next door. Unfortunately, I feel like our government at times, at least before Trump, was helping feed the kids next door before they fed the kids in our own house first. So, if we have a surplus of money or aid to give to other countries, sure, by all means, give it to them. It breeds goodwill. It helps other people out. But you need to solve things here first. So is it a waste of money? Strongly disagree. My nation is great. MAGA. Make America great again. Hoorah! Go the God Emperor Trump. All hail ye. There is no God but the frog, and the God Emperor is his prophet. If that doesn't answer this, then I don't know what does. Research should be conducted on an international scale. By all means, I don't mind other countries getting involved in it, spending money, joint research projects. Should it be exclusively on an international scale? Absolutely not. If we want to do research, whether or not other countries want to get involved in it, I have no problem us going alone. Should it be conducted? I guess I'm neutral, because I'm not 100% sure the rationality of this question. It would be nice if we could get more international projects that could benefit mankind together. Absolutely, I have no problem with that. But should be conducted on an international scale to the expense of keeping things nationally? I'm not sure. So neutral, unsure. Government should be accountable to the international community. No, they are accountable to their citizenry. The people that live in the borders that country is responsible for, they are who the government is accountable to. Now, when you get into examples like the exceptions, such as in the case of like Hitler going around mass murdering the Jews, the gays, the Romani, pretty much anybody that didn't conform to his really twisted view of the Übermann. They should be held accountable to their actions by the citizenry of that country, and if they severely piss off everyone else, I guess we can justify going to war with them. But if it's like, let's say our government wants to stop the refugee influx, we shouldn't be held accountable to the international community, because we believe that we need to secure our borders, take care of ourselves first before we help anyone else. We shouldn't be held accountable to anyone but the citizenry. In the case of real out there exceptions, again, like mass murdering Hitler, they should be held to account, but I'm not necessarily sure accountable to the international community, as I'm guessing that they're asking for. So I will disagree with this one. Even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is not acceptable. In principle, this is absolutely 100% correct. And I will say, even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is not acceptable unless they are using violence against you first. Example such as Hitler's Germany, or Nazi Germany, up until the point where they actually started murdering people in the street and taking them out of their homes in the middle of the night to send them to slave labor camps to work them to death. Up to that point, technically violence would not have been acceptable, morally speaking, under the traditional Christian values. However, there comes a point when you go to a level where you need to defend yourself. You have a right to defend yourself against the violence of others. So I'll do neutral, because in theory it would be best not to use violence, but you come to that point where if there's enough violence against you, you do have a right to defend yourself and use violence against the violence being used against you. So neutral, unsure. My religious values should be spread as much as possible. Neutral, unsure. I mean, I believe my own moral values, since I'm from a Western government, from America. I believe our values should be spread far and wide. The rights to worship however you choose, so long as you don't murder others in the name of that religion. You have the right to worship or to not worship. My religious values, I guess from an egotistical sense, I would say agree, should be spread as much as possible, because I think I'm relatively speaking open, though I know the Antifas who are watching this would disagree. So, but my view of openness, I guess I should. I would say this, though this seems like it could be a very loaded question. Our nation's values should be spread as much as possible. Coming from America, absolutely. Freedom of speech, freedom to defend yourself against oppression, the right to live without government intervention. I mean, granted, we don't live up to those ideals in America, but that's what our nation's values are, even if we're not living up to them, and I do strongly agree that they should be spread as much as possible. It is very important to maintain law and order. Yes, otherwise we end up with the Second Battle of Berkeley. Going back to the violence issue, I really don't want to see violence on the street. My God, we're all Americans. We're brothers and sisters, for Pete's sake. Our ancestors shed the same blood and the same mud forming our country. I don't want us to be fighting in the street. We need to maintain law and order, and that goes for both sides in the conflict, the Antifa crazies and some of the more right-wing crazies. But oftentimes it seems that it's because the right-wing ones are having to defend themselves against the left-wing crazies, because the left wing is allowed to go nuts in the street, that we devolve into the Second Battle of Berkeley. So I would like to see the law applied evenly, equally across both sides of the political spectrum, and then maybe we'd have less violence in the street. So strongly agree. The general populace makes poor decisions. Absolutely. They didn't vote for Donald Trump. I'm joking, but don't take that out of context. I'm going to disagree with this one, because it's not that they make poor decisions. That's somewhat egotistical. Just because somebody didn't vote the way I wanted them to doesn't mean that they made a poor decision. People vote in their self-interest. Now, their self-interest may differ from my self-interest, but as long as they are voting in their self-interest, they're not making a poor decision. I may disagree with them that it truly is in their self-interest, but they're not stupid. The general population does not make stupid decisions. It's just they are given perhaps incomplete facts and are forced to make a decision off of that and vote in their best interest, even though their best interest might not necessarily be the best interest for them or for the country. So I will disagree, just because only if you're voting against your own self-interest are you making a poor decision. I just think that people are given the not good information, and therefore if you have bad information, bad decisions come out of it, not necessarily because you are making a poor decision, but because you were fed bad information. So I will disagree with this one. Well, not all victimless crimes should not be criminal. However, in the case of because not everything is necessarily victimless, but in the case of drug use, I mean, if I am not, I'm pro-legalization, just not pro-use of drugs. My own viewpoint is if you want to take drugs to kill yourself slowly at night and that's what you want to spend your money for, go right ahead. Take the drugs. If you do, you should not, however, be allowed access to health care at my expense because you want to try to kill yourself with narcotics. I also believe that if an employer wants to not hire you because you're on drugs, he should have that right. Just as if you want to become a government employee, you should be drug tested. I also believe that if you want welfare, even though welfare is a different issue all of its own, but with welfare as it is right now, I believe that you should be drug tested because I don't want you spending money on drugs when you should be spending welfare money on food, housing, clothing, and whatnot. But as far as legalization for those who want to waste their money and killing themselves slowly over it, by all means, it should not be a crime. The sacrifice of some liberties is necessary to protect us from acts of terrorism. I will disagree. In the short term, it may look like it's helping, but in the process, we get the Patriot Act, we get a bunch of other laws that pass through with this line of thinking that, sure, now it may help us against terrorism, but what about when terrorism is over? Now they still have all the power, and the threat is over. They're not going to give up that power, so we're screwed in the end. I strongly disagree. It may help in the short term to fight terrorism, but in the long term, that's how you screw over a population and you devolve into having less liberties, how you aren't allowed to defend yourself from government oppression and whatnot. So I will strongly disagree with this one. Government surveillance is necessary in the modern world. Warrantless wiretapping level surveillance? No. I believe that we have a constitution that requires warrants for search and seizure. I believe that must be upheld, and we need to have a more open warrant process and open enforceable process, so we know that they're only issuing warrants for truly criminal cases. I don't believe that they should be getting a warrant to grab all of Verizon's user data just because they want to find a bad apple in there. Is it necessary? To a limited extent, I'll agree, because you do need if it's done legally and lawfully, a certain level of surveillance might be necessary. Tracking of internet forums that terrorists use and whatnot, yes. However, is it necessarily justified? I'm not sure. It's a necessary evil at the very least. However, there should be very stringent oversight and limits to how far that they can go. So I'll do neutral, unsure. The very existence of the state is a threat to our liberty. Agree. The problem is, if you don't set up a state
someone else will. It's just natural for humans to create some sort of overall hierarchical structure, and though I might not like what we do now, it is better than many alternatives that are out there. It will always be a threat to our liberty, but you need something over there to act as a sort of buffer to try to create reasonable laws to govern society, and as long as they enforce those equally across the population, then it is a necessary evil. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't a threat to our liberty, so I'll agree. Regardless of political opinions, it is important to side with your country. Some of these I'm having to infer where they're coming from to answer them. This one I'm not sure where they're coming from. I mean, regardless of political opinions, it is necessary to try to come together as one country, not to fight each other in the streets and try to make things work. Yes. However, is it always important to side with your country no matter what? Not necessarily. Hitler's Germany. Regardless of political opinions, was it a good idea for everyone to come together to support of that country? Absolutely not. In general, I guess, though, like here, it would be nice if the left and the right could get together and, say we hate each other's guts, but at least let's work together to try to get an amicable relationship going because we love America. I'll do neutral unsure because I'm not exactly sure where they're coming from with this one. No authority should be left unquestioned. Strongly agree. There are times when you give up your right to question authority, such as those who enlist in the military. However, because of chain of command, how that works, because it's not a democracy, the military is a dictatorship, because in the split second of battle, you don't have time for committees. You gotta be willing to take an order that says, hey, from the commander that says, hey, I know it's probably going to kill you, but go take that hill. So in that limited situation, no authority shouldn't be questioned, but after the taking of the hill, I mean, I don't mind questioning of the authority to see if that was the right decision or not, because, hey, life and limb was put on, at risk for it. I'll downgrade to agree, because there are a few times that you give up the right to question authority, but you entered into that agreement, hopefully, openly, and knew what you were getting into, such as enlist in the military. But in general, you shouldn't just let an authority get away with things. I mean, you want to be respectful about how you ask it. Like, say, hey, I don't understand. Why are we doing it this way other than this way? Because I want to learn this better, but you should question authority. Hierarchical state is the best. It's what we have. It's what humans gravitate to the best. Neutral, unsure. Just because in the end, everything devolves into a hierarchical state of some sort. I mean, even communism. Even though they say we're all equal before the law, aren't. There's actual a hierarchical system. Actually, maybe I'll agree, because it seems like if we keep gravitating to a hierarchical system in some way, shape, or form, it must work. So I guess maybe it might be the best, since that's what we always gravitate to. It is important to know that the government follows the majority opinion, even if it is wrong. Neutral, unsure. I mean, it's important for the government to follow the will of the people. However, sometimes the will of the people, again, Nazi Germany, can get a little... and bad things can happen. But in general, it should be that as long as the government is following the laws that were already set forth, should bow down to what their constituents told them to do. But I'll do neutral and sure because there are plenty of exceptions to this that I can think of from a historical stance, so I'm not 100% sure. The stronger the leadership, the better. Agree. It's important for moral leadership, and it's good to have a strong leader to lead something, but sometimes the least qualified can become leader just because they are a strong personality and not necessarily the best. However, if you do maintain good leadership skills, the better leadership skills the leader has, the better, if that makes sense. Democracy is more than a decision-making process. You strongly agree. There's more to the democratic theory than just we want people to get together and vote for once every 4 years for presidency. There's a lot of theory and morality questions and societal questions that come involved in democracy. So I will say democracy is definitely more than a decision-making process. Environmental regulations are essential. Not the way we're doing it. Like, do I want companies just pouring contaminated fluids or runoff garbage into public parks or areas where people are? No, absolutely not. They need to be held accountable for that. There are reasons we have zoning laws in areas set up for dumping in areas that aren't because of risks to the local population. So I'll agree from that perspective. However, to the ridiculous extent that we're going right now, that regulating coal out of business, hey, what about us poor schlubs who can't afford these price hikes in electricity because solar, yes, per watt is cheaper, but operational costs skyrocket. I would prefer the coal. Yes, there is a little bit of environmental damage that we need to be aware of and know how to treat it, but hey, it's a lot better than what the Chinese do with their obscene levels of pollution that they do. So, the limited extent, I'll agree. A better world will come from automation, science, and technology. Without morals, can you say we have a better world? I mean, some people say that the world we live in right now is worse off. I tend to be of the mindset, I live in the middle of a 90-degree plus summer, which is hot for me from where I live. Usually we didn't ever get this hot. To be able to come home, and even though I have to turn off all the lights and record this essentially in the dark minus the light of my computer screen just to stay reasonably cool, and have a fan on, which I do apologize if you do hear that in the background. But I agree that for the most part, if we can get better automation, science, and technology, as long as we keep morals in there, we'll be good to go as well. Children should be educated in religious or traditional values. Yes, please. I notice they say or. I strongly agree, just because you need to know why we have these values. People forget that, yes, it's good not to murder, not to steal, not to kill, not to create forgeries. But why is it we've come to this way? People think that, we know now that it's good not to do these things because it forms a more coherent society. But we know these things form a good society, but why did we come up with these values to begin with? And why should we apply these? Especially when it seems like if you don't apply religious values of don't lie, cheat, or steal, or murder, that it seems like when it's so much easier to get ahead. It comes from the religious background that you are judged what you do in life, and therefore you are answerable to a higher power after your life is over. So the easier you make yourself life on earth by taking shortcuts that screw over others, you pay for it in the end. That's a religious concept, and I think it's good to have that religious background so that we know why we've adopted these values. It's also good to maintain, actually I'll downgrade to agree, because it's also important to retain traditional values, because traditional values exist because we used them effectively, and they were our keys to our survival at points. Now, sometimes we have outlived the traditions. Some traditions no longer apply, and we need to rethink some of them. But for the majority of traditions, we have always abided by them, such as like traditional gender roles, because they worked. Why mess with a system that works? I believe now some of the traditions we should question to see if we've come to a point where they necessarily work, but be prepared that, you know what, maybe we tested it and then we saw they did work. You might not agree that they work, but they do, and they provide beneficial effects for our society. An example of why it's important to question traditional values, but be ready to accept that, you know, they work. I'm thinking of a NASA example I was reading a couple of years ago. With EPA mandates, they were trying to clean up the fuel they were using in the rocket program. So the NASA engineers were going through the recipe, and they found all these chemicals that were against EPA regulations, that were, I guess you could say, pollutants, though not as bad as others that have been used in the past, not as bad as the Chinese do. But they said, you know what, we don't know why these chemicals are in the fuel supply. You know what, we know that they aren't the best for the environment. Let's take them out. So they did. They questioned tradition. Now, in their case, they found out that they discovered, or I should say rediscovered, why it was in the mix. Because these chemicals, when they took them out, because of instabilities in burning of fuel, that they found it was shaking the rocket apart, essentially, and would cause the rocket to veer off course and become a danger. And I think they had to explosively abort a rocket launch because it was shaking itself up so dangerously. They found that these chemicals that they thought were poisonous and could be taken out willy-nilly actually provided a steadier burn so that the rocket wouldn't shake itself apart. And so they had to put the chemical back in. They questioned it. They found out that there was actually a damn good reason why the recipe was what it was, and decided to go back to it because otherwise they weren't going to be able to have a rocketry program. So I don't mind questioning of the traditional values, but you need to teach them, and you need to be ready to accept that, you know what, some of them might work. Traditions are of no value on their own. Agree, going back to the previous example for this one as well. Religion should play a role in government. It should play a role in the lives of the people that we vote into government. After all, a person's religious background tells a lot about the morals of a person. So religion should play a role in people's lives, and therefore will play a role in their lives and their view on morals while in the government. However, I would prefer that the government stay out of religion as much as possible, in particular like dictating what religions are and are not allowed, and dictating what religions can and cannot say. So I will disagree with that one. Churches should be taxed the same way as other institutions. I know this will come as a surprise for someone who is actually pro-religion and pro-churches, and people should be taught religious values, but though I am, I guess you could say I identify as Christian, I do not like authority, our concentrated, blind obedience of authority, and particularly the way some of the crap that the Catholic Church has gotten itself embroiled in. There was that sex orgy scandal in the Vatican that a bunch of people got arrested in. I believe that institution should be investigated. If they want, particularly their way of trying to cover up the bad actions of some of their, what are they called, the dioceses, the bad actors in there, I think they should be investigated. If they want to maintain a tax-exempt status, should be up for public audit. If they want to operate in this country, they should be up for public audit. I believe that churches should be taxed, also the same as other institutions, because I've seen a lot of churches abuse their tax-exempt status, and I would also like to get them out from the thumb of the government. That some churches I've seen, even those that aren't abusing their status, their status is held over their head, this sort of like a Damocles sword, to either toe a specific political line, even though the church might not agree with it. But if they dare teach what they believe in their hearts is the will of God, then they'll get their tax-exempt status yanked for daring to get political in their 501c3 corporation status. So to allow churches, the more freedom to teach what they believe in, they should have their tax-exempt status removed, so they're not beholden to government with that hanging over their head. Some of the things that churches do, I believe that they need to be taxed the same way as everyone else. It needs to be held up to a more stringent public audit. I would also like to see sort of more like basement churches, more so than centralized gathering places, things where people get into smaller groups and get to know each other and maybe work together, finding someone's basement each and every week, and for a pastor to preach in and maybe help put them up for the week. Type deal. I would prefer seeing that type of setup rather than some of these churches where I feel they just abuse their status so much. I am very pro-religion and would like to see it taught more, and to allow kids in school to be able to experience religion. But churches themselves, actually a lot of organizations need to have their 501c3 status yanked, and I'll include churches in that one. If nothing else, like the NFL is another organization that I believe should have its tax-exempt status yanked as well, and should be taxed as well as another corporation. So I guess even though I agree that churches should have their tax-exempt status yanked, it's because of a general, broader view of there's a lot of abuse within the 501c3 tax-exempt status system that needs to be brought under control. And even if it might cause difficulty and sometimes harm to the congregation, that might cause the congregation to break up, I believe in the long term, if we could revoke a lot of this garbage 501c3 abuse, churches, sadly, I think would be a small price to pay, especially to bring the NFL under control again. They are a really big example of why 501c3 needs to be yanked from a lot of people. Climate change is currently one of the greatest threats to our way of life. I don't know, poverty, the country imploding into violent chaos because of Antifa. I did say terrorism already. A financial collapse of the system. Really, there's a lot more immediate ways, and I strongly disagree. I mean, that it is the greatest threat to our way of life in no way, shape, or form. There's a lot more things that are going to kill me sooner, like some of these antibiotic-resistant bacteria that are coming up all over the place. Is it a concern, and it might be something that we need to adapt to in the future? Yeah, I'll give it that. But the greatest threat, no way in hell. It is important we work as a united world to combat climate change. Well, first off, let's have the debate of we don't talk about guns, politics, or religion. Now we're going to add climate into that mix as well. Is climate change actually something we can fight against? I mean, I've looked at the numbers presented. It disturbs me that pretty much any organization that received direct government funding says practically the exact same thing, and they don't even bother changing the wording. Sometimes it's pretty much the entirely exact same argument, just the header is changed on it, which concerns me and is traditionally a red flag for me to scream BS on. So, is it something that we might have to adjust to? I believe climate does change. It's changed well over the years. I mean, look at the various forms of life that have existed on this planet. Climate change has occurred. I'm not denying that fact. It's only a question of seeing how drastically climate has changed over the millions of years of Earth's history, the question becomes, considering how drastically it changed without humans even being on the face of the planet, how much of the climate change right now is our impact? And even then, even if we were to completely cut off our impact on the climate would change anyway, and the question is, would we be able to adapt to what that climate changes even if we weren't the cause of anything? So I'll disagree, because I believe that climate change, the way it is presented, is complete bogus. However, I do agree that climate has changed. It will change. It's only a matter of how much of climate change is our fault. Is there anything we can actually do about it? Or is it just something that we're going to have to try to adjust to and hope we survive, type thing? So the way it's presented from where I think they're coming, I'm going to disagree. Society was better many years ago than it is now. I don't know. I got air conditioning, or what passes as air conditioning, on this hot and humid night. Actually, from earlier I said it was 90. From what I looked at a little bit ago, it's actually about 97 with almost 100% humidity. It sucks. And as I said, I'm doing this in the dark with just the light of my screen. Compared to even about 50 years ago, I think, is when really commercial or residential grade air conditioning even started coming in on the planet, into the marketplace. I would say we're better off now. I mean, the violence in the street would make someone question. Technologically and in general, let me go downgrade to disagree, because I believe in general we're better off now, though there are plenty of exceptions to that. I think we have gotten better at it, especially with the internet. Now we have the ability to better openly discuss and debate long-standing political issues and traditions and tropes that maybe needed to be debated, even though it causes plenty of pain right now. At least we're having the discussion, even though it is painful. So society was better many years ago than it is now. Disagree. It is important that we maintain the traditions of our past. Going back to the previous one about traditions, I'll go agree. They existed for a reason. We adopted them because they became traditions because we forgot why we did it and just kept on doing it anyway. But most of them, or pretty much all traditions, started off serving a purpose. Now, sometimes we evolved past the purpose, and sometimes those traditions might hold us back, because technologically in society we may have gotten past them, but we shouldn't just throw them out of hand, and it's important to understand where our traditions come from, maintain them, and we can see whether or not some of them do need to be upgraded today, but it's still important to teach them so we know where we came from. So I will agree with that one. It is important we think in the long term beyond our lifespans. Strongly agree. After all, one of the things about getting in life is having kids and being able to think about how you're going to best help them after you die. Even if you don't have kids, it's very selfish to think about just getting through your lifespan. How about doing something that can benefit society in a whole? So while I don't think it should be overwhelming, I do believe that we should think in the long term beyond our lifespans, because if we just all devolve into selfishly thinking about only myself during my lifespan, we don't improve as a society. Reason is more important than maintaining our culture. Who decides what reason is? I'll go neutral, unsure on this one, because again, it's who says what is reasonable. After all, you look at the social justice warriors, what they say is reasonable, I call flat out crazy. Just as what they say, they call me flat out crazy right-wing nut job, I think is a reasonable way of looking at maintaining our culture. I believe culture is extremely important. I believe, going back to tradition, sometimes cultural parts need to be reevaluated after a time due to technological and societal advancements, but neutral, unsure, because it's important to maintain both. However, I guess I would be slightly agreeing that reason is more important than culture. Drug use should be legalized or decriminalized. Agree. Going back to the all victimless crime thing, I think that's a very bad... This I agree with. Drug use should be legalized or decriminalized. The way they worded earlier with victimless crime, not all crimes that people say are victimless actually are. I heard some people say, well, suicide is a victimless crime. Well, what if you commit suicide in front of somebody else? You've just committed violence and caused a death of someone, even if it's just yourself. You have unnecessarily and unlawfully impacted the life of someone else. Yeah, you can argue you committed suicide, it's your right, but you've just inconvenienced and forcibly forced someone else to sit through it in public. So it's not necessarily just because it's they call it victimless doesn't mean it actually is. But this one I will agree with, that drug use should be legalized or decriminalized. Same-sex marriage should be legal. My own personal opinion is that as the way the law is written now, yes, because I don't like seeing separate classes of citizens and the government getting involved and was saying who you can and cannot marry, and then getting involved with the taxes. Essentially, it's not actually them even saying who can and cannot marry, it's who can and cannot become eligible for a tax deduction, which drives me nuts. I think that the whole same-sex marriage debate would never have happened if the government hadn't gotten taxes involved with it. I don't like seeing the government dictating who you cannot and cannot legally be with to get a tax deduction based upon voluntary association with one another. I don't like that. I believe marriage should have stayed an actual religious thing. To me, marriage is very sacred from the religious standpoint. The laws of marriage are determined by my religion, my church that I belong to. Other people, it's dictated by their religion and their church they belong to. I mean, I don't mind if the religion says that we don't care whether you're gay or not, or same sex or not, we don't care. You're all equal before God. I don't care. I believe that they have that right. That church would have the right to marry them, just as I believe that other churches that don't agree with same-sex marriage should have the right to say so and not be forced to commit an act that they find immoral. But because the government has moseyed in and gotten taxes involved with it, it should be legal, because we shouldn't be setting up different classes of citizens, and but the government should have gotten out of marriage a long time ago, never gotten taxes involved in it, and I don't believe that the same-sex marriage debate would have even been a problem had it not been for the tax ramifications. And then, as one in former military, all of the military benefit ramifications that get involved based upon the government saying who you can and cannot marry. So it should be legal under the system that we have now, but the government should never have gone in marriage, period. No cultures are superior to others. Strongly disagree. I believe America, with its right to openly question government authority, the right to speak your mind, whether or not you find it offensive, is good, compared to European, where if you have the wrong political opinion, they have no freedom of speech and they'll arrest you for it. What was it? Count Dankula taught his dog Sieg Heil as a joke because he dated his girlfriend's dog, and because she thought it was so cute, he wanted to make it the most uncute thing on the planet Earth. Now, I don't particularly appreciate his sense of humor, but it's his right to be sort of an asshole. He shouldn't be arrested and thrown in jail for it, especially when he isn't even threatening anybody about it. He's just doing a dumbass stunt because he knows it's abhorrent, but he wanted to be an ass about it. That's his right. So I believe from a cultural standpoint, America versus Europe, ours is definitely stronger than that, as an example. I also believe that in America, our belief that you have the right to trial, innocence until proven guilty, and the right to defend yourself from oppression are all important things that make us culturally superior to Europe. I believe that even though the left likes to scream, "Oh, we're still oppressing them," we do actually have a pretty good... there might be a few areas that we're not quite up to snuff with gender equality, but actually we are pretty much there. They're way better off than what they used to be in the 50s, and I wish they would be more appreciative of it. But compare it, especially when they think of places like Saudi Arabia, I wish they would be really appreciative so they could see, hey, we actually are pretty good as a society towards equality, unlike them. So I strongly disagree with this one. Sex outside of marriage is immoral. That's a religious thing. My own personal opinion is, even though I think technically under my branch of Christianity it's definitely frowned upon and looked down against, but you're not going to hell for it. My own personal opinion is I don't give a damn. And I think most people don't give a damn either. I mean, it all depends upon your religious background. I don't care if you engage in it, just as long as you don't spend every other day telling me about what it was like doing it. I don't care what you get up to. What you do in your own body with your own consensual relationship with a voluntary association with another, I don't care. Go ahead, do it. So I guess, though it varies, I'll disagree with this one, that I don't believe it's immoral, but I'm bordering on the neutral unsure because I really don't care. If we accept migrants and all, it is important that they assimilate to our culture. Yes, please, strongly agree. If you want to come here to America, I want people who want to become Americans. Granted, it's important to remember where you're from, but you shouldn't be coming to America because you want to bring your culture here. You should be coming to America because you want to become an American. Just like if I wanted to go to another country or become a citizen of another country, I should become like them. I probably never will be, because most other countries are very particular about who they let in and determine whether or not you are one of them, more so than America. But it's important to become the culture that you want to assimilate to. It's not the same to visit. I want to visit all over the place, not necessarily accept their I will respect their culture and abide by it while I'm over there, but I don't want necessarily to assimilate it while visiting. But if you want to permanently move to a spot, you need to learn to assimilate. Background, most immigrant families I know, the first generation did come over here to America. Some of them did find it a hard time assimilating, but in the case of like one immigrant family, they're Eastern European. I cannot remember exactly where they are off the top of my head. That I know their son, they came over here. They could barely speak English. They came over here, found it very difficult to assimilate in it themselves, but he was not allowed to speak their native language. He learned it anyway, because he wasn't that he wasn't allowed. He was very discouraged about speaking the native language at home, even though it was difficult for them. They wanted him to become an American, to learn English, to learn the American customs, way of life. They want him to still respect the old country, per se, but they want him to become an American. And that's what you should be willing to do when you come over and want to assimilate to a new country. Abortion should be prohibited in most or all cases. In most, yes. The reason why I say this, so we don't talk guns, religion, politics, climate, now abortion. So, if there is a threat to the woman's life for giving birth, by all means, it's her decision. In that case, my moral stance is on that one: better the life that you know than the life that you're not sure of, type thing. However, that's a really shitty situation, and whatever, if her life is in danger, if she has the baby, the medical danger, that's her decision. I'm not going to reserve moral judgment. It would be very hypocritical of me to do so. That's a moral situation that I thankfully will never have to be in, and I feel sorry for anybody that's put in that situation. It sucks. It's going to be very difficult, and I will go with whatever she abides by. That if there is a legitimate medical threat to her life, her decision, whichever way it goes. Abortion should be prohibited in most or all cases. In most, yes. The reason why I say this, so we don't talk guns, religion, politics, climate, now abortion. So, if there is a threat to the woman's life for giving birth, by all means, it's her decision. In that case, my moral stance is on that one: better the life that you know than the life that you're not sure of, type thing. However, that's a really shitty situation, and whatever, if her life is in danger, if she has the baby, the medical danger, that's her decision. I'm not going to reserve moral judgment. It would be very hypocritical of me to do so. That's a moral situation that I thankfully will never have to be in, and I feel sorry for anybody that's put in that situation. It sucks. It's going to be very difficult, and I will go with whatever she abides by. That if there is a legitimate medical threat to her life, her decision, whichever way it goes. In the cases of where sex was not voluntary on her part, such as rape as well, because she did not give consent to engage in that activity, and pregnancy resulted, that she did not willingly enter into that consensual agreement. That one I will also give that it's her decision. If in the case of involved in counseling the person, which I don't see why I would, but if I was, I would try to push them against killing the baby. But again, she did not willingly enter into that agreement arrangement and is now suffering the consequences of it. She has the right in that case. However, the reason why I am generally opposed to abortion, like in the case of how I think that the left handles abortion, is that it's not just for the extreme moral cases, that they want free and open abortion to everything. The reason why I think this is because recently I saw an ad for Planned Parenthood. In there, they're talking about the services Planned Parenthood does, and it seems like pushing the abortion angle. There's this young woman, looks to be young 20s, sitting there on her couch, obviously pregnant, and she has the acceptance letter from college, and she's staring at the letter and at her unborn, and they're pushing the whole services of Planned Parenthood angle, and that's disgusting, that you're putting a measly education above a human life. I find that completely abhorrently disgusting, that you would even consider that. But you obviously believe that on the left, because otherwise that commercial would never have been okayed and set up for public release. I mean, if you abstinence, even though there needs to be some sex ed taught. I mean, you don't want to have babies? Best way not to? Abstinence. If you want to engage in that activity, I mean, no one is unaware of the fact that activity doesn't have the byproduct of creating a newborn life. So if you want to engage in that activity, you need to do so with the understanding that there's the risk that you can become pregnant out of it. And if you want to, I don't like the idea that you're just going to engage in that activity willy-nilly, and then if a baby results of it, that you go, oh, we just wanted to give in that activity. You knew that that could be a byproduct of it, and I do not want you to murder a newborn life just because you thought it inconvenient that you wanted to engage in activity knowing the potential consequences of it, and then just murder the kid anyway. So that's why I'm against abortion. As I said, in moral cases where she did not give consent to the interaction and pregnancy resulted, again, she did not willingly consent to the situation. Therefore, there is the question about, in that case, she has the moral right in my mind. I would push her otherwise, or gently push her otherwise, but it's her decision. Or in the case of that there is a threat to her life, I will let abortion go with that, because, I mean, that's a shitty situation to decide to live or not to live. I would not wish that on my worst enemy. But in most cases where there is not a bona fide threat to life, or that engagement in intercourse was not consensual, that you knew the consequences beforehand, and if a life resulted of that, you should not have the right to just murder it because it was inconvenient, because all you wanted to do was have consequence-free sex. There's no such thing as consequence-free anything, and I do not like them treating a human life in such disregard. So I strongly agree that it should be prohibited in most cases. Gun ownership should be prohibited for those without a valid reason. Strongly disagree. I am a big Second Amendment supporter. That is the last line of defense against a totalitarian state. With or without a reason, you don't need one. You have the right to defend yourself. Whether or not there is a bona fide threat against your life right now, or you're preparing to defend yourself and your family in the future, you have the right to defend yourself and get a gun. Also, as a video gamer, I would love to shoot all the guns in real life that I get to shoot in the video game. Now, I would never want to harm anyone. That is a situation that thankfully I've never been put into. I hope I never have to be put in the situation. I hope no one else has to be put into the situation. But you should be allowed to think of the future and how are you going to protect yourself if the worst case situation happens. So it should be prohibited for those without a valid reason. Strongly disagree. I support single-payer universal health care. Oh, boy. Yes, let's get government more involved with health care. Obamacare was not bad enough. Let's make it even worse. I strongly disagree. Prostitution should be illegal. Oh, boy. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that joke again about politics and religion, but how to put this delicately? I believe it should be regulated. That when done, it should be that you have to register the service that you're working for. The service has to be open for audits on a second's notice, or not even a notice, just a no-notice audit. Be able to show up and cops be able to show up and make sure everything's above board and what they're doing is legal. I believe in most cases when you make something illegal, you allow the criminal element to take over to provide the service, and that's where abuses come. Plus, if we can make it legal, then people don't want to go to jail. So they're less likely to engage in the illegal services and go to the legal establishments where they know that things are above board, where they know that they're being treated fairly. Therefore, it kills off the illegal element because people aren't willing to put up with the risk for illegal the risk for it when there's a legal substitute available that is audited and controlled to make sure any parties are willing participants in the activity. So I disagree with this one. I believe that like drugs or alcohol, that when you make it illegal, you make it easier for criminal elements to abuse people. I believe that if we legalized it, though I don't particularly agree with it, my own religious background is I've tried to help people figure out ways not to engage in the activity. I believe that if they want to, they should be allowed to do it. And by legalizing it and regulating it, you open up the opportunity to get rid of some of the human rights abusers, because then people will go to the legal alternative that is above board and audited and made sure that all participants are legal, rather than risk going to some shady guy providing a service of illegal persons that he forced into the position without their consent. So should it be illegal? Disagree. Maintaining family values is essential. Going back to tradition again. Traditionally, the family is the source of the best learning opportunities for the kids. A strong family unit has been shown scientifically to provide, be a good status indicator of how strong the family unit is based upon to predict the success of the child. So I've seen enough evidence that family values help immensely, so I do agree that family values is essential. To chase progress at all costs is dangerous. Strongly agree. Nazi scientists, as an example, they chased progress, but what was the cost? Oh, let's just mass murder a few 100 million Jews. Ugh. To be able to think of the ability of another human being to disregard the life of others in such a flippant manner, I cannot even begin to conceive of that. But I do hold it up as an example of why chasing progress at all costs is dangerous, because the cost is often your soul and often the lives of others. Genetic modification is a force for good, even on humans. Neutral and sure, because I think I know where they're coming from with this, like GMOs and whatnot. I mean, any technology, it's all based upon the user. Genetic modification could be used for good. I see it the way Monsanto is doing, like GMO corn, as a way of creating plants that are not heirloom quality, meaning, if I'm remembering these terms correctly, not being able to produce their own seed, so that the farmer has to constantly buy the crop from Monsanto because the crop isn't capable of self-reproduction, and also destroys the farmland so that only the GMO crop can grow on it. I do find genetic modification in that example very horrendous and needs to be brought under control. However, like any technology, it's all based upon the user. So I'll do neutral, unsure, because if you're doing it for good and there can be good applications of it, fine. Genetic modification to make us never suffer the common cold again, I'm fine with that. But it's all about who, how, and why they're doing it. We should open our borders to immigration. Disagree. See, previous a bit about if they were assimilating to our culture, I wouldn't mind so much. We were taking their best, their brightest, and they wanted to assimilate, sure. After we've, again, taken care of our citizenry, then sure, let people who want to come here and contribute to America in, sure. But not just open them in general, no. So, disagree. Government should be as concerned about foreign citizens as they are about those within our borders. Strongly disagree. You were elected to take care of the citizenry who elected you. Now, after you've solved the problems here, by all means, go out, help others. But until then, you were elected to take care of a problem here, take care of a problem here. So they should be as concerned about foreign citizens as they are about those within our borders. Disagree. Here first. All people, regardless of factors like culture or sexuality, should be treated equally. I used to be golden rule. Treat others as you would want to be treated. My own opinion is now, whenever you first meet someone, treat them the absolutely best you can. Go above and beyond. Treat them like they are the king. But after that, treat them as they deserve. I will agree with this to the extent that I will give everybody the same chance. I might disagree with like the group you belong to as a whole, but I will treat you as an individual. You as an individual, I will give the same courtesy I give to every other individual. And you will then be responsible for forming my opinion, whether it be for good or ill after that. So I will treat everybody in that case, but it's up to you to see whether you deserve my respect after I open up to you with hospitality first. So I will agree, but there are limits. It is important that we further my group's goals above all others. Well, of course, I agree with my in-group like everyone else. From a moral standpoint, no. We should be trying to find the best way of handling things, whether or not they necessarily means our group is the one that gets to decide how things are done or not. But for the most part, I will agree that even though it's very egotistical and possibly hypocritical for this, because I believe in my group's goals as others should believe in theirs, because I believe in Western values, I do believe that they should be promoted over others, but in general, it should be left up to history, like how the different groups work together to see how they went. So I'll do agree, though bordering on neutral, because we should be working to find the true answer to things, not necessarily promote one group over another unless that group works. Yeah, so I'll agree for this one. And this will be the last question, so we'll get to see. Am I the right-wing radical Hitler Youth that the left seems to think I am? Let us see. Alright, so how do we read this? Okay, so 8 values. Equality versus markets. I'm not necessarily sure. I believe that everybody should have the opportunity, the same opportunities, but it should be up to the individual to either succeed or fail based upon what they did with those opportunities. I don't like equality of outcome. I like equality of chance, and then see what they do with it. So I guess maybe the market aspect is kind of right. So patriotic, yes. I am a big Trump supporter. I am America first. Every citizen should be their country first. Yeah, for that. Civil access, liberty versus authority. Yeah, I'll go with that. And I'm very equal-minded. I can see, for the most part, I prefer liberty, but there are times when you have to have structure. Let's see here. Whoops. So societal access, tradition versus progress. This one I'll slightly disagree with. I think I'm a little bit more in favor of progress over tradition. Because I do like experimenting with things. I do like seeing things work. I do question authority and don't just take it at face value because we always did it, therefore it's correct. I want to see why we always did it. Now, I'm more than happy to say that, you know what, sometimes it's important to be able to step back and say, you know what, even though I disagree with that tradition, there's a reason why it works. And so you always have to be ready to accept the tradition, but you should always see question and see, is it still useful? Don't just blindly accept anything. So let's see, does this make me a Nazi? Okay. So, my closest match is I am a neoliberal. uh, okay. I was expecting myself to be more right wing as far as this went. I will say that I do think that this is a somewhat reasonable test, even though some of the questions, I don't like the wording of them. Though I guess neoliberal does actually kind of fit. Up until the last election, I did always view myself as libertarian. Up until Gary stick his tongue out at the reporter, what is Aleppo Johnson, decided to open his mouth for the Libertarian Party. Oh my God, the shit show that was the Libertarians that year. I have never been so disgusted to be a Libertarian up until that point. Yeah, the Libertarian Party was really failed horribly. They sold out. They wanted government money. They abandoned all libertarian principles, as far as I'm concerned. So I no longer identify as libertarian after the 2016 election. But I guess in a way that kind of neoliberalism is kind of libertarianistic in some ways, though the Marxist liberals that exist today, there's no way in hell I would do that. I'm very questioning of social backgrounds, but when it comes to the markets, I do believe that it's important to have free and open engagement in economic forms, and free, open in general. In any social interactions, it should be the right to a voluntary association with whoever you want, regardless of whether or not it's politically acceptable or not. So I guess neoliberalism fits, though I'm kind of surprised. I was still thinking conservative, particularly with my market axis that it's using, that I'm very pro-open market, and especially the pro-nationalistic aspect of me. Myself, but I guess because of the civil axis and societal axis are so pretty close to 50-50 statistically speaking, that I guess neoliberalism I guess kind of does it. Well, this has been my 8 values test. So according to them, I'm not a crazy right-wing Nazi, but I know that won't satisfy any Hitler Youth wannabes, that won't satisfy the not Hitler Youth, but they're the Antifa anti-fascist crazies, who will say that because I am right of Stalin, that and right of Lenin, pretty much just right of Marx, period, that I must be Hitler. But this has been an interesting example. Hopefully you've been able to get a little bit more into my psyche and how I view things. So my own viewpoint with this channel is that I want to be open about my bias. There's no such thing as unbiased reporting, but as long as you're open about what your bias is, others can then figure out what you're reporting on and understand it better, and hopefully get a better judge of where you're coming from, so they know whether to agree or disagree with you. So this has been my 8 values test. Thank you all for watching and putting up with this extremely long video. More videos should be coming out soon, as there has been a crap load of examples of stupid shit by the left that I feel it is my duty for my voice to be heard, whether you want it to be or not. So please stay tuned, subscribe to my YouTube channel, America Uncensored. We'll be getting a website up shortly. You can also go to my Twitter account at Deplorable3432 on Twitter. Thank you, and I will see you all in the next video!